On Mother's Day, my husband and son gave me a mug that said, "World's Most Pointless Woman." They laughed like it was a joke. I smiled, cleared the table and washed the dishes. That night I booked a one-way ticket. 2 weeks later he posted, "Please, if anyone sees her, tell her we just want her home." The mug was white ceramic with black lettering. 3 words that would end my marriage. World's most pointless woman. I stood in my kitchen on Mother's Day morning, holding that mug while my husband Kevin and our 15-year-old son Derek doubled over laughing. Derek's phone was pointed at me, recording every second of my shock. Kevin slapped his knee like this was the funniest thing he had ever witnessed. Their laughter echoed off the walls I had painted myself 3 summers ago, bouncing around the room I kept spotless for them. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here and sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that every person deserves respect and recognition for their contributions, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see what happened next. I read the words again. World's most pointless woman. This was not a gag gift with something better hidden behind it. This was the gift. The only gift. My Mother's Day present. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here, standing in this kitchen with my heart cracking open while they laughed at me. I woke at 5:30 that morning, same as every morning. The alarm on my phone buzzed softly and I shut it off before it could wake Kevin. He needed his sleep for the golf game he had planned for later. I slipped out of bed quietly, my feet finding the slippers I kept on my side, and padded downstairs in the dark. The house was mine during those early hours. Quiet. Peaceful. Before the demands started, before I became what everyone needed me to be, I had this small pocket of time that belonged only to me. I used it to prepare for them. I started the coffee first. Kevin liked his strong 2 scoops per cup, ready the moment he came downstairs. I set the timer so it would finish brewing at 6:45, exactly when he usually appeared. While the machine gurgled and hissed, I pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. Blueberries I had bought fresh yesterday. Eggs from the carton I kept on the middle shelf. Bacon from the butcher, the thick-cut kind Derek preferred. I mixed pancake batter from scratch because the boxed kind never tasted right. I fried bacon until it was crispy but not burnt the way Kevin insisted it should be. I sliced strawberries and arranged them in a pattern on the good china plates, the ones we only used for special occasions. I wanted today to feel special. I wanted them to notice. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla and hope. Pathetic hope looking back now, but in that moment I believed this year might be different. I believed they might see the effort, might acknowledge the love I poured into every small gesture. I set the table with care. Forks on the left, knives on the right, napkins folded into triangles. I used the crystal bowl Kevin's mother gave us as a wedding gift for the fruit salad. I polished 2 smudges off the surface with my apron before filling it. Everything had to be perfect. Derek's baseball uniform was already hanging by the door, washed and pressed. His cleats were clean, laces replaced last week when I noticed the old ones were fraying. His water bottle was filled and waiting in the refrigerator. I had checked the game schedule 3 times to make sure I had the right time written down. 2 o'clock. Home field. I would be there in the bleachers like always, cheering even though he barely played anymore. This was my life. This was what I had built over 12 years of marriage and 17 years of motherhood if you counted the pregnancy. I gave up my career when Derek was 2 years old. I had been a marketing coordinator at a firm downtown, a job I loved, a job where I was good at what I did. I was on track for a promotion to senior coordinator. My boss had told me during my last review that I had a future there, that the company saw potential in me. But Kevin said it made sense for one of us to stay home. His job paid more. His job had better benefits. His job had more potential for growth. And someone needed to be available for Derek for the doctor appointments and school pickups and sick days that came with raising a child. I agreed because I believed in building something together. I believed sacrifice was the foundation of family. I thought we were a team. So I quit. I stayed home. I learned to structure my entire existence around supporting Kevin's advancement and raising Derek into a good person. I attended every parent-teacher conference, even the ones Kevin said he was too busy to make. I coordinated every school fundraiser, spending hours in the PTA meetings listening to other mothers debate bake sale versus car wash. I remembered every birthday in Kevin's extended family, bought every gift, signed both our names on every card. I learned to cook his mother's recipes exactly the way she made them, even though they required ingredients I had to drive 30 minutes to find at a specialty store. I ironed Kevin's work shirts every Sunday night while he watched whatever game was on television. 5 shirts, perfectly pressed, hanging in his closet organized by color. He never thanked me. He just expected them to be there. I transformed our house into something that looked better than when we bought it. I painted walls. I refinished furniture. I planted a garden that bloomed in coordinated colors. When Kevin's colleagues came over for dinner parties, they complimented him on his beautiful home. He accepted their praise without ever mentioning that I had done all the work. Somewhere in all that giving, I forgot to ask what I was receiving in return. Or maybe I was afraid to ask because I already knew the answer. Nothing. I was receiving nothing except the privilege of continuing to give. The warning signs had been there for years. I just refused to see them. Last Mother's Day, Kevin gave me a potted plant he picked up at a gas station on his way home from work. The flowers were already wilting, the soil dry. It died 2 weeks later because no one watered it except me, which seemed to defeat the entire purpose of receiving a plant as a gift. The year before that, he forgot entirely until Derek reminded him at breakfast. Kevin had looked up from his cereal, eyes widening slightly as he realized what day it was, and said, "Oh, Happy Mother's Day." No gift. No card. Just 3 words delivered with the same enthusiasm as Pass the Salt. Kevin's sister Rebecca made a joke at a family barbecue last summer. We were all standing around the grill and someone asked me what I did. Before I could answer, Rebecca laughed and said, "Heather? She's basically the maid who doesn't get paid." Everyone laughed, including Kevin. He laughed at his sister's joke about me being unpaid domestic labor while I stood there holding a plate of hamburger buns I had just finished toasting. Derek started calling me Heather instead of Mom when he was around his friends. The first time I heard it, we were at his baseball game. One of his teammates asked who I was and Derek said, "That's Heather. Not my mom. Just Heather." Like I was someone he barely knew. Kevin began introducing me at work events as my wife without using my name. As though my identity was only an appendage to his, something that existed in relation to him rather than on its own. These moments accumulated like dust. So gradual I did not notice I was suffocating until I could not breathe anymore. I told myself they were stressed. Kevin worked long hours. Derek was a teenager dealing with school pressure. Boys will be boys. I was being too sensitive. I was overreacting. I was making something out of nothing. I made excuses for them because the alternative was unbearable. And then came this Mother's Day morning. Kevin walked into the kitchen first, wearing the golf shirt I had ironed and hung in his closet last night. Derek followed, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in 3 directions. Neither of them wished me Happy Mother's Day right away. Instead they exchanged a look. A glance that passed between them like a secret, something conspiratorial that made my stomach tighten with inexplicable dread. Derek pulled out his phone immediately, angling it toward me. I thought maybe he wanted to take a picture, something sweet to post on social media showing what a thoughtful son he was. Kevin held a plain drugstore bag. Not wrapped. Not even a gift bag with tissue paper. Just a plastic bag from the pharmacy down the street, the kind you get when you pick up a prescription or grab something last minute. My heart sank, but I kept smiling. Smiling was what I did. I smiled through discomfort. I smiled through disappointment. I smiled through the gradual erosion of everything I thought I was building. I smiled until my face ached from the effort of holding the expression in place. Kevin handed me the bag with a grin that was too wide, too eager. He looked like someone who believed he had just executed something incredibly clever. I reached inside and felt ceramic. A mug. For one brief, foolish moment, I let myself hope it might say something meaningful. World's best mom. Or even just mom. Something that acknowledged I mattered. I pulled it out and read the words. World's most pointless woman. And that was when they started laughing. Their laughter did not stop. It grew louder, feeding on itself, expanding to fill every corner of the kitchen I had scrubbed yesterday in preparation for today. Kevin bent forward, gripping the edge of the counter for support as if the sheer hilarity of the moment had weakened his knees. Derek had tears streaming down his face, his phone still pointed at me, still recording, capturing every microsecond of my humiliation in high definition. I stood there holding the mug. White ceramic. The kind you could buy at any novelty store for $7. The black lettering was printed in a bold sans serif font, impossible to misread. World's most pointless woman. Each word hit separately. World's most pointless woman. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. This could not be the actual gift. There had to be something else. A real present hidden somewhere waiting for the right moment to appear. This had to be the setup for a joke with a punchline that would reframe everything, that would make the cruelty disappear and replace it with something bearable. But Kevin was not reaching for another gift. Derek was not saying gotcha. There was no second act to this performance. This was it. This was what they thought of me, distilled into 3 words and printed on a mug for my Mother's Day present. I looked at Kevin, searching his face for any sign that he understood what he had just done. His eyes were bright with amusement. His mouth stretched wide in a grin that showed too many teeth. He looked proud. Actually proud, as though he had accomplished something worthy of celebration. Derek lowered his phone slightly, wiping his eyes with the back of his free hand. He was still grinning, still basking in the shared joke with his father. The two of them stood there in my kitchen, united in their entertainment, bonded by my pain. The mug felt heavy in my hands. Impossibly heavy. It should have weighed nothing, just a few ounces of ceramic and glaze, but it felt like I was holding something much denser. Like I was holding the weight of every moment I had convinced myself I was valued when I was only tolerated. Every time I had made excuses for them. Every time I had told myself I was being too sensitive. Every sacrifice I had made believing it was building toward something. All of it was in this mug. All of it reduced to a punchline. Kevin finally stopped laughing long enough to speak. He wiped his eyes dramatically and said, "Your face. Oh man, your face was perfect. Derek, did you get that?" Derek nodded, replaying the video on his phone screen. "Got it. This is gold." Gold. My shock was gold to them. My hurt was content to be shared and laughed at by people who did not even know me. I opened my mouth to say something. I am not sure what I intended to say. Maybe I was going to ask if they were serious. Maybe I was going to tell them this was not funny. Maybe I was going to ask why they thought this was acceptable. But before any words came out, I heard myself laugh instead. It was not a real laugh. It was a sound I made with my throat and mouth, a performance of amusement that my body produced automatically after 12 years of training. I had learned to laugh at jokes made at my expense. I had learned to be a good sport, to demonstrate that I could take it, to prove I was not one of those overly sensitive women who could not handle humor. So I laughed. A hollow, empty sound that did not reach my eyes or my chest or any part of me that was real. Kevin looked relieved. "See? He gets it. I told you she'd think it was funny." Derek nodded, putting his phone in his pocket, the video safely recorded for later use. "Yeah, Mom's cool like that. Mom's cool like that. Mom can take a joke. Mom does not mind being called pointless on the one day of the year supposedly dedicated to celebrating her." I said something self-deprecating in response. I cannot remember the exact words now. Something like, "Well, you're not wrong," or "At least it's honest." Some verbal participation in my own degradation that gave them permission to feel good about what they had done. Kevin patted my shoulder the way you would pat a dog who had just learned to sit on command. "That's my girl. Always such a good sense of humor." Then he turned away from me and sat down at the table. Derek followed, dropping into his usual chair with the casual ease of someone who had not just participated in emotional cruelty. They began eating the breakfast I had prepared. The pancakes I had made from scratch. The bacon I had cooked to the exact texture they preferred. The fruit I had arranged on the good china. They ate and talked like nothing had happened. Kevin mentioned his golf tee time was at 11, so he would need to leave by 10:30. Derek reminded him about the baseball game at 2. Kevin asked if Derek had studied enough for his finals. Derek shrugged and said probably. Neither of them thanked me for breakfast. Neither acknowledged the food, the effort, the hour I had spent preparing it all while they slept. Neither apologized for the mug. Neither asked if I was okay. I stood near the counter, still holding the mug, listening to their conversation. My mind felt strangely detached from my body. I was watching the scene from somewhere outside myself, observing this woman in an apron holding a cruel gift while her family ate and laughed and planned their day around her absence. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not dramatically. Not with any external sign that they might have noticed. It was quieter than that. More fundamental. It was the sound of a door closing. The feeling of a decision being made without conscious thought. I was done. I set the mug down on the counter carefully. Then I began clearing the table. Kevin and Derek did not move to help. They never did. They simply leaned back in their chairs while I reached around them to gather plates and silverware. I carried everything to the sink and turned on the water. We had a dishwasher, a good one I had researched and selected 2 years ago, but I washed the dishes by hand anyway. The mechanical repetition of it gave me something to do with my hands while my mind worked through what had just happened. The soap created bubbles that smelled like artificial lemon. I scrubbed each plate thoroughly, rinsing away syrup and crumbs. Behind me, Kevin and Derek moved to the living room. I heard the television click on, the volume rising as they found some basketball game to watch. Their voices carried through the house, discussing player statistics and team rankings. Normal conversation. Easy and comfortable, unburdened by any awareness that something had just broken irreparably in this family. I looked out the window above the sink. The garden I had planted was visible from here. The roses were blooming, deep red and perfectly shaped because I tended them every week. I fed them specialized fertilizer. I pruned dead stems. I watered them during dry spells. Everything I touched in this house flourished and thrived and looked beautiful. Everything except me. I thought about the mug sitting on the counter behind me. World's most pointless woman. I thought about Derek's phone recording my shock, capturing my pain to be replayed and shared with people who would never know the context, who would only see the surface of the joke without understanding what it meant. I thought about Kevin's complete lack of awareness that he had just destroyed something that could not be repaired. His genuine belief that I would find this funny, that I would laugh along, that I would accept this latest dismissal of my worth with grace and humor. He did not know he had just ended our marriage. He did not know that the woman washing dishes at this sink was already planning her departure. He did not know that his pointless wife was about to become his ex-wife. I dried my hands on the dish towel, folded it carefully and hung it on its designated hook. Then I walked past the living room where they sat watching television. Neither looked up. Neither called out to me. Neither noticed I was leaving the room. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and closed the door behind me. I sat down at the small desk in the corner where I kept the household files and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, casting blue light across my face. I opened a new browser window in incognito mode and typed one phrase into the search bar. One-way flights. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through options. Not from fear. Not from doubt. From something else entirely. Something that felt like anticipation. Like relief. Like the first breath after being underwater too long. I was leaving. I just had to figure out where. Portland, Oregon. I selected it from the list of available destinations because it was far enough away that Kevin would not think to look for me there, and because I had never been there before. No memories. No associations. Just distance and the possibility of becoming someone new. The flight left in 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare. 14 days to dismantle a life I had spent 12 years building without anyone noticing what I was doing. I closed the laptop and went downstairs. Kevin and Derek were still in the living room, absorbed in the basketball game. I walked past them to the laundry room and began sorting clothes. White with white. Colors with colors. The same routine I had performed hundreds of times before. Except this time I was counting. Counting how many of my own clothes I could pack without creating a noticeable gap in the closet. Counting how many pairs of shoes I could take without leaving empty spaces that might raise questions. Counting days until I would never have to sort Kevin's socks again. That first day set the pattern for the 13 that followed. I became a ghost in my own home, moving through familiar routines while secretly preparing for departure. I packed Derek's lunch for school the next morning. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, granola bar. The same lunch I had packed hundreds of times. I left it in the refrigerator with his name written on the bag in marker. I ironed Kevin's shirts for the week. 5 of them, organized by color in his closet. I folded his underwear and restocked his drawer with socks. I made sure his gym bag was ready for his Tuesday morning workout. Everything had to appear normal. On Tuesday evening, Kevin had a work dinner. One of those events where spouses were expected to attend, where I was supposed to smile and make pleasant conversation with people who barely remembered my name from one event to the next. I wore a navy dress and pearl earrings. I laughed at his boss Martin's joke about wives being the real bosses at home while the men around the table chuckled knowingly. Martin's wife Sandra sat across from me, sipping white wine and nodding along. She and I had attended dozens of these dinners together over the years. We had exchanged recipes and recommendations for dry cleaners. We had made small talk about our children and our gardens. But we were not friends. We were accessories to our husbands' careers, pleasant fixtures at corporate gatherings. I smiled at Sandra and asked about her daughter's college search. She talked for 10 minutes about campus visits and application essays. I nodded in the right places and asked follow-up questions that demonstrated I was listening. No one at that table had any idea I was already gone. That in less than 2 weeks I would be on a plane to a city none of them knew I had even considered. On Thursday I sat in the bleachers at Derek's baseball game. It was an away game, 40 minutes of driving to watch my son sit on the bench for 7 innings. He got to bat once in the 9th inning and struck out on 3 pitches. I clapped anyway, along with the other mothers who performed the same ritual of enthusiastic support regardless of actual performance. Carol Jenkins sat next to me as she usually did. Her son played third base. She talked about the team's chances at making regionals and asked if I was going to volunteer for the end-of-season banquet committee. I told her I would check my calendar and get back to her. I knew I would not be here for the end-of-season banquet. I would be in Portland starting a new job, living in an apartment that did not contain any memories of being called pointless. No one noticed I was already elsewhere. I had perfected this performance over years of being functionally invisible. Present but absent. Physically here but mentally somewhere else entirely. At night, after Kevin fell asleep, I transferred money from our joint account to a new account I had opened at a different bank. I kept the amount small. $50 on Monday. $75 on Wednesday. $60 on Friday. Small enough that they would not trigger any alerts, that they would blend into the normal flow of household expenses. The new account was in my name only at a bank across town that Kevin had no connection to. I had opened it on Monday afternoon, during the time I usually spent grocery shopping. The account representative, a young woman named Michelle, had processed the paperwork efficiently and handed me a temporary debit card. She did not ask why I was opening a separate account. She just smiled professionally and wished me a good day. By the end of the first week I had moved $800 into the new account. Not enough to live on for long but enough to start. Enough for a security deposit on an apartment. Enough for food until I found work. On Monday of the second week I scheduled an appointment with an attorney. I found Patricia Brennan's name through an online search for divorce lawyers specializing in cases involving financial complexity and asset division. Her website featured testimonials from women who described her as fierce and strategic. That was what I needed. Not sympathy. Strategy. Her office was downtown above a coffee shop called Morning Brew. I told Kevin I was going grocery shopping and would be back in 2 hours. He barely looked up from his laptop when I left. Patricia's office smelled like leather and old books. The furniture was dark wood, substantial and expensive looking. Framed law degrees hung on the wall behind her desk. She was probably in her early 50s with gray hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. Then she pulled out a legal pad and pen and said, "Tell me everything." I told her about the mug. About the laughter. About 12 years of marriage where I had gradually disappeared into the role of unpaid household manager. About giving up my career. About the corporate dinners and the baseball games and the endless invisible labor that made everyone else's life function smoothly. Patricia took notes in precise handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. How long had we been married? Did we own property jointly? What retirement accounts existed? Had there been any documented incidents of verbal abuse or emotional mistreatment? When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Not pity. Something else. Recognition maybe. "Here is what you need to understand," she said. "The most powerful position you can negotiate from is the one where you have already left. Once you are gone, he cannot manipulate you. He cannot guilt you. He cannot use proximity to wear you down. You control the narrative and the timeline." She explained community property laws. In our state, assets acquired during marriage were considered jointly owned regardless of who earned the income. The house we lived in, purchased 8 years ago, was community property. Kevin's retirement account, funded throughout our marriage, was community property. The investment portfolio he managed, grown during our marriage, was community property. "You sacrificed your career to support his advancement," Patricia said. "That has monetary value. You provided unpaid domestic labor that allowed him to focus on his job without distraction. That has monetary value. You are entitled to half of everything and I can make sure you get it. She asked if I was ready to fight. I realized I had been ready for years. I just needed someone to tell me I had the right to. I hired her before leaving the office. She gave me instructions for the next steps. Document everything. Gather financial records. Collect evidence of contributions and mistreatment. Build an ironclad case. Over the following days I became an archivist of my own life. I photographed every room in the house, documenting improvements I had made. The walls I had painted. The light fixtures I had installed. The built-in shelving I had designed and paid to have constructed in the living room. I made copies of 12 years of joint tax returns. I downloaded bank statements showing the flow of money during our marriage. I printed performance reviews from my old marketing job, evidence of the career trajectory I had abandoned. I screenshot Derek's social media posts. The ones where he tagged me as the cook, with a laughing emoji. The Instagram story where he filmed me cleaning the kitchen and captioned it "free maid service." The TikTok where he joked about me being his personal Uber driver. I saved emails Kevin had sent to colleagues. The one where he complained about me wanting to attend a work event, calling me high maintenance for expecting to be included. The one where he made a joke about wives and their expensive hobbies, even though my only hobby was maintaining the home he lived in. Each piece of evidence was another brick in the wall I was building between my old life and whatever came next. The file grew larger each day. Documentation of contributions. Proof of contempt. Evidence that I had been here, that I had mattered even if they never noticed. On the morning of my departure I woke at 5:30 as usual. I made breakfast. Pancakes again, though not the special ones from Mother's Day. Just regular pancakes from the mix in the pantry. I set out Kevin's coffee mug and Derek's orange juice. They came downstairs at their usual times. Kevin mentioned he had a regional conference that would keep him out until late. Derek reminded me he had finals this week and would be studying at his friend Marcus's house after school. Neither asked about my plans. Neither noticed I was wearing the burgundy dress Kevin had once criticized. Neither saw the suitcase I had loaded into my car at dawn, hidden in the trunk beneath an old blanket. After they left, I walked through the house one final time. I did not cry. I did not feel sad. I simply observed rooms that would soon belong to someone else's life. I closed the door behind me without locking it. Let Kevin deal with that when he came home to an empty house. I drove to the airport with my hands steady on the wheel. The airport parking fees accumulated in long-term Lot C while I signed a lease for a furnished studio apartment in southeast Portland. The landlord was a woman named Iris, probably in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. She met me at the building entrance, a narrow 3-story structure wedged between a vintage clothing store and a Thai restaurant. The neighborhood smelled like coffee and rain-soaked pavement. People walked past with canvas bags and bicycles, moving with the unhurried pace of those who had chosen this area specifically because it did not demand performance. Iris unlocked the street-level door and led me up 2 flights of stairs. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, Unit 3B. She handed me the keys without asking questions. No inquiry about why I was renting furnished. No curiosity about where I had come from or why I had arrived with only one suitcase. She simply pointed out where the thermostat was located, explained that trash pickup happened on Tuesdays, and mentioned the corner market stayed open until 11 if I needed anything. The apartment was small. One room that functioned as bedroom and living space combined, with a kitchenette along one wall and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The furniture was mismatched but clean. A futon with a faded blue cover. A small table with 2 chairs. A bookshelf holding books the previous tenant had left behind. The window looked out over narrow streets lined with old trees that were just beginning to show autumn color. It was mine. That was the only thing that mattered. No one here knew I had been a wife or a mother or the punchline to a cruel joke. No one knew about the mug or the laughter or the 12 years I had spent disappearing into someone else's life. I unpacked my single suitcase, hanging clothes in the small closet, placing toiletries in the bathroom cabinet. Everything I owned in this city fit in one piece of luggage and still left room for what I had abandoned. That first evening I walked to the corner market Iris had mentioned. It was the kind of place that sold organic produce alongside conventional brands, where hand-lettered signs advertised local honey and fresh-baked bread. I filled a basket with foods I actually liked. Sharp cheddar cheese instead of the mild kind Kevin preferred. Sourdough bread instead of whole wheat. Coffee with actual flavor instead of the bland brand Derek said was fine. Strawberries because I wanted them, not because anyone else had requested them. The cashier, a young man with multiple ear piercings and a friendly smile, bagged my groceries and told me to have a nice night. I carried them back to my apartment and arranged everything in the small refrigerator. My food. My choices. My life. I made dinner from what I had bought. Cheese and bread and strawberries. Simple. Exactly what I wanted. I ate sitting on the fire escape accessible through the window, watching the sun set over rooftops I did not recognize. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, colors so saturated they looked artificial. I was alone. Completely alone in a city where I knew no one. And I was not lonely. There was a difference I was discovering between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness was wanting company you did not have. This was freedom. On Monday morning I updated my resume. 12 years showed as a gap in my employment history, a blank space where a career should have been. I described what I had done during those years in language that translated domestic labor into corporate terminology. Household management became operations coordination. Budgeting became financial planning. Volunteer work became project management and stakeholder relations. I applied to 17 positions at marketing firms throughout Portland. By Wednesday I had received responses from 5. 3 were polite rejections citing my extended absence from the field. 2 requested interviews. The first interview was with a large corporate firm downtown. The hiring manager, a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, spent most of the meeting asking why I had taken so much time off and whether I was truly committed to returning to work. He used phrases like rusty skills and outdated experience. I left that interview knowing I would not accept a position there even if offered one. The second interview was different. Horizon Collective operated out of a converted warehouse in an industrial neighborhood that was being slowly transformed by artists and small businesses. The building had exposed brick walls and high ceilings with metal beams. Plants hung from hooks, creating small pockets of green throughout the open workspace. Simone Keller, the hiring manager, met me in a small conference room with a wall of windows overlooking the street. She had silver hair cut in a precise bob and wore dark-framed glasses that gave her an air of sharp intelligence. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. She reviewed my resume in silence for a full minute, her expression neutral. When she reached the 12-year gap, she paused. I braced myself for the usual questions about commitment and relevance. Instead, she looked up and asked, "What skills did you develop during this time?" The question surprised me. Not why did you leave work, but what did you learn while you were gone? I explained project management through coordinating school fundraisers. Budget optimization through managing household finances. Stakeholder coordination through navigating relationships with teachers, coaches, extended family. Crisis management through handling everything from medical emergencies to last-minute schedule changes. Simone listened without interrupting. When I finished, she smiled. That is just parenting and household management translated into corporate language. You have been working. You just were not getting paid. She explained that Horizon Collective specialized in marketing campaigns for nonprofit organizations. The work required someone who could manage multiple projects simultaneously, communicate effectively with diverse stakeholders, and operate efficiently within tight budgets. Everything I had been doing for 12 years, just with different terminology. She offered me the position before I left the building. Marketing coordinator, handling campaigns for 3 to 5 nonprofit clients at a time. The salary was modest but livable. The benefits included health insurance and 2 weeks of paid time off. I accepted before reaching the elevator. My phone had been on silent since I left home. On Thursday evening I finally checked it. 43 text messages. 17 missed calls. 3 voicemails. The texts from Kevin followed a predictable progression. Confusion first. Where are you? When are you coming home? Then annoyance. This is really inconvenient, Heather. Derek has a game and I have work. You need to come back and handle your responsibilities. Then anger. What kind of mother abandons her family? People are asking questions and I do not know what to tell them. The messages grew more desperate as days passed. At least tell me you are okay. You are scaring Derek. But Derek had not sent any messages. Kevin was using our son as leverage, assuming guilt would drag me back to a life I had already left. On Friday morning, exactly 3 days after my departure, Patricia sent the automated email I had drafted before leaving. Brief, professional, devoid of emotion. I have left. All future communication will go through my attorney. Patricia Brennan can be reached at the following email and phone number. Kevin's response arrived within minutes. You cannot just leave. This is abandonment. I will make sure everyone knows what you did. You will regret this. I did not reply. Patricia was right. He could not manipulate what he could not reach. I established new routines that belonged entirely to me. Morning runs along the Willamette River, where the water reflected whichever mood the sky was in that day. Other runners nodded in passing, a silent acknowledgement of shared space and purpose. No one asked where I was going or when I would be back. Afternoons I worked at a cafe called Bread and Ink. The barista, a woman in her 20s with short purple hair, learned my order after 2 visits. Black coffee with 1 sugar. She started preparing it when she saw me walk through the door. This small recognition, this being seen and remembered for something as simple as how I took my coffee, felt profound. Evenings, I attended a pottery class at a community center 6 blocks from my apartment. The instructor, a patient man named Robert who had been throwing pots for 40 years, taught us to center clay on the wheel and shape it with steady hands. Most of what I made collapsed or cracked. Robert said that was part of learning. Not everything you create will be perfect, and that is acceptable. I read novels I chose for myself. Literary fiction that Kevin would have called pretentious. Mystery series Derek would have found boring. I took long baths without anyone knocking on the door asking when I would be finished. I ate dinner at 9 o'clock because I felt like it, not because family mealtime had been designated for 6:30. I discovered I genuinely enjoyed my own company. I was not the boring, pointless woman they had labeled me. I was simply a woman who had never been given space to be herself. 2 weeks into my new life in Portland, I was sitting in Bread and Ink with my laptop open, working on a campaign proposal for a homeless youth organization, when my phone buzzed with a notification I had not expected to see. Someone had tagged me in a Facebook post. I had left my account active but dormant, not posting or engaging since my departure. The notification came from Kevin's profile. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment before I opened it. The photograph was from our last family vacation, a beach trip to the Oregon coast we had taken 8 months earlier. In the image, I stood on the sand with my arm around Derek. Both of us were smiling, sunburned, wearing the relaxed expressions of people enjoying a holiday. Behind us, the ocean stretched blue and calm under a cloudless sky. I remembered that trip clearly. I had spent most of it in the rental kitchen, preparing meals while Kevin went deep-sea fishing with a charter company he had researched for weeks. Derek had complained about being bored and spent his time on his phone. I had smiled for this photograph because that was what you did on family vacations. You smiled and pretended everything was fine and documented happiness for people back home to see. Kevin's caption made my stomach tighten with anger. Please, if anyone sees her, tell her we just want her home. We love her and miss her. Heather, if you are reading this, we are sorry. Please come back. Derek is devastated. The post had been published 3 hours earlier. It already had over 200 reactions and 60 comments. I scrolled through them slowly, reading each one. His colleague Brian from the regional office. Praying for you, man. Hope she comes home safe. Our neighbor Margaret. Oh Kevin, this is so heartbreaking. We are all thinking of you and Derek. Sandra from the work dinners. Sending strength to your family during this difficult time. The narrative Kevin had constructed was masterful in its manipulation. He was the devoted husband desperate for his wife's safe return. Derek was the traumatized son missing his mother. I was the unstable woman who had inexplicably vanished, possibly experiencing a mental health crisis that made me a danger to myself. No one questioned his version of events. No one asked why a dedicated wife and mother who had spent 12 years sacrificing everything would suddenly disappear. They simply accepted that I was the problem, that something was wrong with me, that Kevin and Derek were the victims of my irrational behavior. I closed the laptop and left the cafe. Back in my apartment, I created a fake Facebook account. I used a stock photo of a golden retriever I found online as the profile picture. I named the account Bailey Thompson, a generic name that could belong to anyone. Through this account, I could watch Kevin's performance without him knowing I was observing. The comments on his post continued to accumulate throughout the evening. Kevin's mother Patricia. Praying for your family, Kevin. Heather always seemed fragile to me. I hope she gets the help she needs. His sister Rebecca. You are so strong for handling this with grace. Derek is lucky to have you. More neighbors. More colleagues. More acquaintances from Derek's school and sports teams. Everyone expressing sympathy for Kevin. Everyone offering prayers and support. Everyone sharing the post to extend its reach further. The women from the PTA, women I had spent hundreds of hours volunteering alongside, coordinating fundraisers and organizing events, expressed shock that I could do something so selfish. Vanishing without explanation. Abandoning my family. Leaving my husband to manage everything alone. Only one person commented something different. Lisa Martinez, a woman I barely remembered from Derek's elementary school years. Her son had been in Derek's third grade class. We had exchanged pleasant conversation a few times at school pickup but had never been close. Lisa's comment read, "Has anyone considered asking why she left?" I stared at those 8 words. Someone had asked the question no one else seemed willing to consider. Why would a woman who appeared devoted to her family suddenly leave? What had happened that no one was discussing? Lisa's comment received no likes. Within an hour, 2 people had responded to her. This is not the time for blame, Lisa. Kevin is going through enough without people questioning him. Lisa did not comment again. I screenshot everything. Kevin's post. The comments. The reactions. The narrative he was building about my instability and his victimhood. All of it documented and saved in a folder I labeled evidence. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Kevin's Facebook post, Patricia Brennan filed divorce papers on my behalf. She had prepared them meticulously over the previous days, incorporating everything I had provided during our consultations. The petition requested a temporary restraining order preventing Kevin from contacting me directly. All communication would go through Patricia. The filing included a comprehensive accounting of marital assets. The house purchased 8 years ago, currently valued at $420,000 with $200,000 remaining on the mortgage. Kevin's retirement account through his employer, containing approximately $180,000. An investment portfolio managed by his financial advisor, valued at $95,000. His pension, which would mature in 12 more years. The paperwork itemized my contributions in language that translated unpaid labor into monetary value. 12 years of household management, childcare, meal preparation, home maintenance, social coordination. Patricia had calculated what I would have earned had I continued my marketing career with normal advancement. Promotions every 3 to 4 years. Salary increases matching industry standards. The number was staggering when accumulated over 12 years. The filing included a statement explaining why I had left. Ongoing emotional mistreatment and disrespect, culminating in the Mother's Day incident where I received a mug labeling me as pointless while my husband and son laughed and recorded my humiliation for social media distribution. Patricia arranged for the papers to be served to Kevin at his office. She selected timing deliberately. Wednesday afternoon, during a meeting with his regional manager and 2 colleagues. The process server entered the conference room, asked for Kevin Caldwell by name, and handed him the envelope in front of everyone. Maximum impact. Maximum humiliation. I felt no guilt about the public nature of the service. Only satisfaction that he would experience a fraction of what I had felt standing in that kitchen holding the mug. That evening I made a decision. I reactivated my own Facebook account, dormant since my departure. My profile photo was outdated, showing a version of myself from 3 years ago at a company picnic, smiling in a way that no longer resembled how I looked or felt. I had taken a photograph of the mug before leaving. A simple image with the mug centered against a white background, the black lettering clearly legible. World's most pointless woman. I uploaded this photograph and wrote a caption. On Mother's Day, my husband and son gave me this mug. They laughed like it was a joke. I smiled, cleared the table and washed the dishes. That night I booked a one-way ticket. To everyone asking where I went somewhere I am not pointless. I did not tag Kevin. I did not tag Derek. I did not name them or provide additional context. I simply stated facts and let the image speak for itself. I posted it at 9:30 on Wednesday evening and closed the laptop. I did not watch for reactions. I took a bath, read 3 chapters of the novel on my nightstand and went to sleep. By morning, the post had been shared 500 times. By noon, 3,000 times. My phone, which I had silenced, showed 147 notifications when I finally checked it. Messages from women I had not spoken to in decades. College friends. Former coworkers. Distant relatives. I always knew something was wrong. You were too good for him. Thank you for sharing this. My ex did similar things. The comments on my post overflowed with support and recognition. Women sharing their own stories of being diminished, of being treated as functionaries rather than partners, of being expected to laugh at their own devaluation. More significantly, the narrative around Kevin's post shifted dramatically. People began commenting with questions. Why had he given his wife such a cruel gift? What kind of husband treats the mother of his child with such disrespect? The sympathetic reactions turned skeptical. The prayers turned to criticism. Several women who had attended those corporate dinners with their own husbands sent private messages. Sandra, who had sat across from me at the table making small talk, wrote, "I always sensed something was off in how he spoke to you. I am sorry I never said anything." Kevin's Facebook post was suddenly recontextualized. Not as the plea of a desperate husband, but as the manipulation of a man trying to control a narrative that was slipping away from him. I watched it unfold through my fake Bailey Thompson account, documenting everything with screenshots. The shift in public opinion. The questions people were finally asking. The recognition that maybe, just maybe, the devoted wife had not left without reason. Kevin attempted damage control that evening. He posted a lengthy statement claiming the mug had been a joke taken out of context, that he had never intended to hurt me, that he loved me and wanted to work on our marriage. The post was carefully worded, likely reviewed by someone with communications experience, but it rang false. The comments section became a battlefield. Some people defended him. Most did not. The conversation had changed and he could not change it back. I closed the laptop and looked out my apartment window at the Portland evenings settling over unfamiliar streets. The public narrative was no longer his to control. The private truth was finally becoming visible. 3 days after my post went viral, Kevin published his response. I was at Horizon Collective when the notification appeared on my phone. Simone had just assigned me a campaign for a literacy nonprofit, and I was reviewing their previous marketing materials when the screen lit up with Kevin's name. The post was long. Much longer than his usual social media activity. The kind of statement that had clearly been drafted and revised, possibly with input from someone who understood public relations. The tone struck a careful balance between contrition and self-defense. He claimed the mug had been a joke taken out of context. He insisted he had never intended to hurt me. He said he loved me and wanted to work on our marriage. He described himself as devastated by my departure and shocked by the public attention our private matter was receiving. He claimed he had always supported me and could not understand how I had interpreted a harmless prank as deliberate cruelty. The language was polished, professional, almost convincing if you did not know the truth behind the words. The comments section told a different story. Women who had experienced similar treatment recognized the deflection immediately. They called him out with brutal clarity. "This is classic gaslighting. You humiliated your wife and now you are playing victim. The fact that you still call it a harmless prank proves you do not understand what you did." Some men defended him, though their defenses were weak and uncomfortable. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe she is overreacting. But even these comments received pushback from others who could see through the performance. What surprised me most were the private messages that began arriving from women I had spent years making polite conversation with at Kevin's work events. Sandra, who had sat across from me at corporate dinners discussing her daughter's college applications, sent a message that made my throat tight. "I always thought he was dismissive of you. The way he talked over you at dinners made me uncomfortable, but I never said anything. I'm sorry for that. I am glad you got out." 3 other wives from Kevin's company sent similar messages. They had all noticed. They had all felt uncomfortable. They had all stayed silent because it was not their place to intervene in someone else's marriage. Kevin's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. The comments on his posts dwindled. His friends stopped engaging with his content. According to one of the wives who messaged me, his boss had quietly removed him from a high-visibility project that would have positioned him for promotion. The public scrutiny was affecting his professional reputation in ways he had not anticipated. He was becoming invisible. Exactly what I had been for 12 years. 4 days after Kevin's failed damage control attempt, I received an email from Derek. The message appeared in my inbox late on a Thursday evening while I was working on the literacy campaign at my kitchen table. The email was formal in a way that felt unnatural for a 15-year-old. The sentences were carefully constructed, the tone measured and controlled. I could tell Kevin had reviewed it before Derek sent it. "Mom, I do not understand why you left. I miss you. Can we talk?" The message was short. Only 3 sentences. But I could read the layers beneath the words. The confusion was genuine. Derek was 15, old enough to recognize cruelty when he saw it but young enough to still believe his father's narrative about jokes and overreactions and wives who could not take harmless pranks. I sat with the email for an hour before responding. I wrote and deleted 3 different versions before settling on something that balanced firmness with compassion. "Derek, I love you, but I need space to rebuild my life. What happened on Mother's Day was not a joke. Filming someone's humiliation and posting it online is not how you treat people you respect. When you are ready to have an honest conversation about that, I am here." I did not hear back immediately. The silence stretched for 3 days. I returned to my routines, working at Horizon Collective during the day, attending pottery class in the evenings, running along the river each morning before the city fully woke. Then on Sunday afternoon a second email arrived. Shorter this time. The formality was gone, replaced by something that sounded more like Derek's actual voice. "You are right. I am sorry. Dad is really angry about the divorce. Can I visit you?" I replied within minutes, providing my address and listing the weekends when I was available. The door was open. He just had to choose to walk through it. The preliminary divorce hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in late October. Patricia had prepared me for what to expect. A sterile courtroom. A judge who had heard hundreds of similar cases. Arguments from Kevin's attorney attempting to minimize my contributions and maximize his entitlement. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, institutional glow. Kevin arrived wearing a tailored navy suit that I had helped him select 2 years ago for a regional conference. He looked every inch the successful professional wronged by circumstances beyond his control. His attorney was exactly what I expected. A man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive watch, carrying himself with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to winning. He sat beside Kevin at the plaintiff's table, reviewing documents with an air of bored confidence. Patricia sat beside me wearing a practical gray blazer and minimal jewelry. Her demeanor was calm, focused, completely unruffled by the performance happening across the aisle. She had told me during our preparation that judges saw through theatrics quickly. What mattered was documentation and law. Kevin's attorney opened with the argument Patricia had predicted. Kevin had been the primary earner throughout the marriage. He had built the retirement account and investment portfolio through his own labor and financial discipline. I had chosen to leave my career, a decision no one had forced upon me. Now I was attempting to claim half of assets I had not earned. The argument was delivered smoothly, with just enough sympathy for Kevin to make him seem reasonable rather than vindictive. I watched the judge's face for reaction and saw nothing. She listened without expression, taking occasional notes. Patricia's counterargument was devastating in its precision. She presented the career sacrifice I had made, including documentation of my job performance and trajectory before leaving. She showed the opportunity cost calculations, demonstrating what I would likely have earned with normal advancement over 12 years. She displayed evidence of unpaid domestic labor that had allowed Kevin to focus on his career without distraction. Then she introduced the screenshots. Kevin's emails to colleagues where he joked about me being high maintenance for wanting to attend company events. His text messages to friends complaining about having to help with household tasks during weeks when I was sick. Derek's social media posts labeling me as free maid service. The judge's expression shifted slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to indicate she was seeing something that changed her assessment. Kevin's attorney objected, claiming the screenshots were taken out of context and represented isolated incidents rather than patterns. Patricia calmly noted that isolated incidents spanning 12 years constituted a pattern. When both sides finished their arguments, The judge reviewed her notes in silence for what felt like an extended period. The courtroom was completely quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Finally, she looked up and spoke. Her voice was measured, professional, carrying the weight of someone who had made these determinations many times before. Choosing to prioritize one spouse's career over another's does not diminish the contributing spouse's entitlement to marital assets. The evidence presented demonstrates substantial unpaid labor that directly benefited the earning spouse's career advancement. Temporary spousal support is granted in the amount of $3,000 per month, effective immediately, pending final divorce settlement. Kevin's face flushed red. His attorney leaned over to whisper something that I could not hear. Patricia remained completely still beside me, her expression neutral, but I caught the smallest hint of satisfaction in her eyes. I felt something I had not experienced in years. Not happiness exactly. Something more substantial. Vindication. The recognition that my contributions had value, that my sacrifice had meaning, that the law saw what Kevin had refused to acknowledge. The temporary support payments began the following week. $3,000 deposited into my account on the first of each month. The amount was enough that I could reduce my hours at Horizon Collective from full-time to 30 hours per week, giving me space to focus on other aspects of rebuilding my life. I enrolled in a professional certification program for advanced digital marketing strategy. The coursework was challenging in ways I had forgotten I enjoyed, requiring analysis and creativity and strategic thinking that felt like exercising muscles I had not used in years. I also started therapy with Dr. Angela Morrison, a counselor Patricia had recommended who specialized in helping women recover from emotionally abusive relationships. Her office was in a converted house near downtown, with comfortable furniture and windows that looked out onto a garden someone tended carefully. In our first session, Dr. Morrison asked me to describe my marriage in one sentence. I thought for a moment and said, I spent 12 years making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. She nodded slowly and wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked up and said, now we teach you how to take up space again. Learning to take up space again required more than Dr. Morrison's guidance and certification courses. It required confronting the relationships I had left behind and determining which ones could be rebuilt and which ones needed to remain in the past. Derek arrived on a Friday evening in early November. He had taken the Greyhound bus from home, a 4-hour journey that Kevin had refused to facilitate. When I asked Derek about the refusal in a text message coordinating his visit, he responded simply, Dad says if I want to see you I can figure it out myself. I met him at the bus station downtown. He stepped off carrying a backpack and wearing a jacket that looked too thin for the Portland weather. He had grown since I last saw him. Not dramatically but enough that I noticed immediately. He looked older. More tired. The easy confidence of childhood had been replaced by something more guarded. We walked to a restaurant 3 blocks from my apartment, a place called the Brass Tap that served burgers and had booths with high backs that created privacy. We sat across from each other, and for the first 15 minutes, neither of us addressed anything of substance. Derek told me about his classes. I asked about the baseball season. He mentioned a friend who had moved to California. I described my new job without going into detail about why I had needed a new job in the first place. The conversation felt performative, both of us circling around what actually needed to be discussed. Then Derek set down his burger, wiped his hands on a napkin and looked at me directly. Dad is really angry, he said. He says you are trying to destroy him. I met his eyes and kept my voice level. I am not trying to destroy anyone. I am protecting myself from being destroyed. Derek looked down at his plate, picking at his fries without eating them. He says you are taking everything. The house, his retirement money, all of it. He had to move into a smaller place because of the divorce settlement. I had anticipated this conversation. Patricia had warned me that Kevin would use Derek as a messenger, would present himself as the victim of an unfair system designed to punish men. I chose my words carefully. Derek, the settlement was determined by a judge based on state law. Assets accumulated during a marriage are considered jointly owned, regardless of who earned the income. I gave up my career to support your father's advancement and to be available for you. That sacrifice has value. I am not taking anything that is not legally mine. He continued picking at his fries. He makes it sound like you just left because you were bored or something. Like you got tired of being a mom and decided to start over. Is that what you think? Derek hesitated. I do not know what to think. You were just gone. One day you were there making breakfast like always, and the next day you were gone and Dad was freaking out and everyone at school was asking if I was okay. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my hands visible on the table. Can I ask you something honestly? Do you remember what you and your father gave me for Mother's Day? His expression shifted. Discomfort crossed his face. The mug. Do you remember what it said? He nodded slowly. World's most pointless woman. Did you think that was funny at the time? Derek looked away, staring at something over my shoulder. Dad said you would think it was funny. He said you always had a good sense of humor about stuff like that. Did I look like I thought it was funny? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. No. You looked hurt. But then you laughed, so I thought maybe it was okay. I laughed because that is what I had trained myself to do. I laughed because I had spent 12 years being the person who could take a joke, who did not make things uncomfortable, who smiled through being treated like I did not matter. But it was not okay, Derek. And filming my reaction and planning to post it online was not okay either. Derek's face flushed. I did not post it. I was going to, but then you left and it seemed weird to post it after that. Why were you going to post it in the first place? He shifted uncomfortably. I do not know. Dad thought it would be funny. Like showing that our family could joke around with each other. At my expense. I guess. I did not think about it like that then. I took a breath and chose my next words carefully. Derek, I need you to understand something. I did not leave because I was bored or tired of being a mother. I left because staying was destroying who I was as a person. I had made myself so small, had given up so much of myself, that I barely existed anymore except as someone who served other people's needs. The mug was not the cause. It was just the final piece of evidence that showed me how little I was valued. Derek met my eyes again. Was it really that bad? Living with us. I did not sugarcoat it. Yes. It was. We sat in silence for several seconds. The restaurant noise continued around us, other conversations and laughter from other tables, but our booth felt isolated from all of it. I am sorry, Derek said finally. I never thought about it that way. I just thought that was how things were. Dad worked and you did everything else. I did not think about whether it was fair. You were a child. It was not your responsibility to think about whether your parents' marriage was equitable. But you are not a child anymore. You are 15. Old enough to recognize when someone is being treated poorly, even if that person is your mother. He nodded slowly. Dad talks about you differently now. Like you are the enemy or something. It is weird. How do you feel about it? I do not know. Confused, I guess. I miss how things used to be, but I am also starting to understand why you could not stay. He paused, then added, Can I visit again? Like regularly? Yes. Anytime you want. The door is always open. We talked for 3 more hours. Derek asked about my job, my apartment, what Portland was like. I asked about his plans for college, whether he was still playing baseball, how he was handling his father's anger. The conversation was not perfect. There were awkward pauses and moments of discomfort. But it was honest in a way our previous relationship had never been. 6 months after my departure, the divorce was finalized. I returned to the same courthouse, the same sterile room with fluorescent lighting and the smell of floor polish. Patricia sat beside me. Kevin sat across the aisle with his attorney, both of them wearing expressions of barely concealed frustration. The judge reviewed the final settlement agreement and declared the marriage legally dissolved. I received exactly what the preliminary hearing had established. Half the equity from the house, forcing Kevin to sell and relocate to a smaller property. Half his retirement account. Half the investment portfolio. The settlement was fair, calculated precisely according to state law, distributed according to clearly established legal precedent. Kevin glared at me across the courtroom as the judge spoke. I looked back at him and felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Not even relief. Just the quiet certainty that I had made the right choice 6 months ago and every day since. Outside the courthouse, Patricia shook my hand. You did it. You got out and you survived. I corrected her gently. I did more than survive. I rebuilt. She smiled. Yes. You did. As I walked to my car, I made a decision I had been considering for weeks. I stopped at the county clerk's office on my way home and filed paperwork to reclaim my maiden name. Heather Sinclair. The name I had been born with, the name that belonged to me before I had merged my identity with someone else's. The woman who had been Heather Caldwell no longer existed. She had died the day she stood in a kitchen holding a mug that called her pointless and decided she was finished accepting that assessment. Writing the memoir was harder than I had anticipated. Not because I lacked material, but because revisiting those 12 years required acknowledging how much of myself I had systematically given away. How many preferences I had forgotten. How many dreams I had abandoned. How completely I had lost my own voice. I wrote in the evenings after work, sitting at my small kitchen table with coffee that went cold while I typed. I wrote about the Mother's Day mug, but also about the thousand smaller cruelties that had preceded it. The dismissive comments. The forgotten anniversaries. The constant expectation that I would absorb disappointment with grace and humor. Rebecca, my literary agent, read the first draft and called me within hours. "This is powerful, Heather. This is going to resonate with so many women who have experienced the same thing." The book sold to a mid-sized publisher called Clearview Press. The advance was modest but meaningful, enough to supplement my income and provide a financial cushion while I continued building my new life. Choosing a title took weeks of deliberation. Rebecca suggested several options that felt too abstract or too victimized. Finally, I proposed something simple and direct. World's Most Pointless Woman. How I Left and Found My Purpose. The cover featured a photograph of hands releasing a ceramic mug, the moment of letting go frozen in time. The book cover arrived 3 months before publication, shipped in a protective cardboard mailer that I opened carefully at my kitchen table. The image was exactly as I had envisioned it during conversations with the design team. Hands releasing a white ceramic mug, captured mid-fall against a neutral background. The title stretched across the top in bold lettering. My name, Heather Sinclair, appeared at the bottom. I held the mock-up and felt something shift inside me. This was real. My story, the one I had been afraid to tell for 12 years, was about to become public in a way that extended far beyond a single Facebook post. The publication date was set for early May, 1 year after the Mother's Day that had changed everything. Rebecca had suggested the timing deliberately. The symbolism would not be lost on readers or media outlets covering the release. Early reviews began appearing 6 weeks before publication. Publishers Weekly called it a unflinching examination of emotional abuse disguised as family dynamics. Kirkus described it as essential reading for anyone questioning whether their sacrifice has crossed into self-erasure. Women's magazines requested interviews. Podcast hosts reached out asking if I would discuss the book on their programs. The attention was overwhelming at first. I was accustomed to working behind the scenes at Horizon Collective, creating campaigns for organizations rather than being the subject of public interest myself. But Rebecca coached me through media training, teaching me how to speak about painful experiences without becoming consumed by them again. My professional life had transformed in parallel with my personal one. Simone promoted me to senior strategist 8 months after I joined Horizon Collective. The role came with increased responsibility for client relationships and campaign development, along with a salary that exceeded what I had earned at my previous marketing position before leaving the workforce. More significantly, it exceeded what Kevin currently earned in his regional sales position. I knew this because Derek had mentioned it during one of his weekend visits, not with malice but as simple fact. His father had complained about money frequently since the divorce settlement, apparently not understanding that court-ordered asset division was not negotiable based on his feelings about fairness. The promotion allowed me to lead campaigns that felt meaningful in ways my previous work never had. I developed fundraising strategies for a homeless youth organization that exceeded their annual goal by 40%. I created awareness campaigns for a food bank that resulted in 3 new corporate partnerships. I worked with a domestic violence prevention nonprofit on messaging that reached communities previously underserved by their programs. My colleagues sought my input on major decisions. They valued my perspective and incorporated my ideas into their own work. When questions arose about target audiences or messaging strategies, people came to my office to ask what I thought. Being seen as competent, being recognized for contributions, being valued for expertise rather than tolerated as infrastructure. These experiences felt revelatory even though they should have been ordinary. Conference invitations arrived regularly. Organizations focused on women's professional development wanted me to speak on panels about career re-entry after caregiving gaps. I traveled to Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, speaking to audiences of women who had made similar sacrifices and were considering similar returns. After each presentation, women approached me with their own stories. They had left careers for family obligations. They had disappeared into supporting roles. They had absorbed disrespect so gradually they had not recognized it was happening until they could barely breathe under its weight. Many were still living in those situations, trying to determine if leaving was possible or wise or worth the disruption it would cause. I responded to every message that came through my website or social media. I remembered what it felt like to believe I was alone, to think my experience was unique, to wonder if the problem was me rather than the situation. If sharing my story helped even one woman recognize she deserved better, the vulnerability of making it public was justified. My personal life became something I constructed deliberately rather than something that happened to me by default. I dated occasionally, cautiously, testing what relationships felt like when they were chosen rather than fallen into. Marcus, a graphic designer I met at a gallery opening Simone invited me to, took me to art exhibitions and actually listened when I explained which paintings resonated with me and why. Claire, a nonprofit director I collaborated with on a campaign, invited me hiking and never expected me to handle all the planning or emotional labor of maintaining the friendship. None of these relationships developed into serious commitments, and I discovered I was genuinely comfortable with that. I did not need a partner to validate my existence or give my life meaning. I had learned to value my own company, to enjoy solitude without experiencing it as loneliness. The friendships I cultivated were reciprocal in ways my previous relationships had not been. Simone texted me articles she thought I would find interesting and I did the same for her. We met for lunch and discussed work challenges and personal struggles with equal investment in each other's experiences. Iris, my landlord, invited me for tea in her apartment every few weeks and told stories about her own divorce 30 years earlier, about rebuilding her life when social support for such decisions was far less common. The women in my hiking group celebrated my victories and offered support during setbacks without keeping score of who had contributed what to whom. Relationships, I was learning, could be balanced and life-giving rather than extractive and depleting. Derek visited most weekends now. He was 17, taller than Kevin, preparing college applications with the seriousness of someone who understood these decisions would shape his future. We cooked dinner together in my small kitchen, experimenting with recipes neither of us had tried before. He asked questions about my work, my memoir, the speaking engagements that were beginning to fill my calendar. He told me about Sophie, his girlfriend of 6 months. She was a year ahead of him in school, planning to study environmental science at Oregon State. Derek described her as kind and smart and unwilling to tolerate disrespect from anyone, including him. I liked her immediately without having met her. He also told me with careful neutrality that Kevin had been dating someone new. A woman named Jennifer who was 32, a full decade younger than me. Derek described her as nice but already showing signs of exhaustion from trying to meet Kevin's expectations while maintaining her own career as a dental hygienist. "I do not want to become like Dad," Derek said one evening while we were washing dishes after dinner. "I do not want to make someone feel the way he made you feel." I dried a plate carefully before responding. Awareness is the first step. Growth comes from choosing differently every single day, especially when choosing differently is uncomfortable or requires more effort. We had difficult conversations during these visits. About the mug and the laughter and his role in documenting my humiliation. About the years when he had treated me as infrastructure rather than as a person. About the assumptions he had made regarding how marriages functioned and how parents should be treated. Derek owned his mistakes without deflecting responsibility onto his youth or his father's influence. He was becoming a better man than Kevin had ever been. That realization brought me more satisfaction than any divorce settlement or book contract ever could. The original mug still sat on a shelf in my living room, positioned where visitors could see it clearly. When people asked about the inscription, I told the story without shame or bitterness. Some were horrified that anyone would give such a gift. Others nodded in recognition, seeing their own experiences reflected in mine. The mug was no longer a symbol of my worthlessness. It had become a testament to transformation, tangible proof that we can take the worst things done to us and convert them into fuel for becoming something better. My memoir would release in 6 weeks. Early reviews were strong. A film production company had expressed serious interest in adaptation rights. I had been invited to speak at a women's leadership conference in Chicago attended by over 2,000 people annually. None of this had been part of any plan because I had not had a plan when I left. I had only known I could not stay. The revenge I had taken was not dramatic or violent. It was simply refusing to participate in my own diminishment. It was building a life so undeniably fulfilling that everyone who had accepted Kevin's narrative was forced to reconsider their assumptions. I had proven that the pointless woman was never pointless. She had just been waiting for permission to demonstrate her worth. I gave myself that permission. And everything changed. The woman I became was not the woman I had been before marriage. That person was gone, replaced by someone who understood the cost of losing herself and refused to pay it again. Someone who took up space unapologetically. Someone who knew her value did not depend on anyone else's recognition of it. I was Heather Sinclair. Not someone's wife. Not someone's mother, though Derek would always be my son. Just myself. Finally, completely, unapologetically myself. And that was more than enough. If this story of silent departure and powerful transformation kept you captivated until the very end, show your support by hitting that like button right now. My favorite part was when Heather posted that photograph of the mug with those simple, devastating words that shifted the entire public narrative. What was your favorite moment? Share it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories of courage and reinvention like this one. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.